Good evening. My name is Reverend Brian Souter. I am the President and Executive Director of Faith in Place, and it is my delight and my joy to officially welcome you to the 2020 Green Team Summit of Faith in Place. This year, as we come together through this virtual platform, we are lifting up the theme of a just recovery. We know as people of faith and conscience that we are facing three major crises: climate change, the pandemic and COVID-19, and racism. And we at Faith in Place believe that these three issues are all deeply interconnected, and that we as people of faith and conscience have a responsibility to connect the dots between these three issues as we seek to take measurable action in our neighborhoods and our communities. So welcome to the Faith in Place Green Team Summit. Tonight we have a keynote panel that will be setting the stage and the foundation for our entire discussion this week. Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night, there are further workshops that go deeper into particular areas that we can get to know one another as people of faith and get to know what we are doing in our communities, learn from one another, inspire each other. We'll have awards throughout the entire summit where that you'll get to hear about faith communities that are already leading the way and be inspired by them and to move forward alongside them and taking it back to your own community to make a measurable difference. Now, when you logged in tonight, we had some music playing that was going behind the slides that you saw that were welcoming you to our Green Team Summit. That music is provided to you by DJ Caesar. At Faith in Place, we also believe in good music, and Caesar is our youth support outreach staff person here at Faith in Place. And not only does he bring significant talent with our youth program, but he also has some DJing skills to get us ready to go so that we're fully engaged and learning together as a community this week at the Green Team Summit. We also have many sponsors who made the Green Team Summit possible, and I want to thank all of them. You can go to our greenteamsummit.org webpage and learn more about all of our sponsors, but tonight's keynote panel is brought to you by the Mike Nowak Show and Natural Awakening Chicago, and to them I want to say a special thank you up front. You might know that Faith in Place is the Illinois affiliate of Interfaith Power and Light. And we're thankful for partners such as Interfaith Power and Light and the many state affiliates who have partnered with us to bring many people to this event this evening. And to our many partners who you can also see more at greenteamsummit.org, we also say a special thank you as we continue to build the movement of people of faith leading the environmental movement towards justice. Well, that's enough introductory words from me. At this time, I want to introduce you to a fabulous organizer here in Chicago, someone who's been leading the way for more than a decade at Faith in Place, equipping our faith communities to lead the environmental movement towards justice. And that is Faith in Place's statewide outreach director, Veronica Kyle. I am filling in for Veronica. We're just having some minor technical difficulties, but no worries. This evening, as Veronica gets her tech ready, we will be connecting the dots between the topics of the three crises that we face: climate change, systemic racism, and COVID-19. We're honored to have with us tonight Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III, Yoca Arditi-Rocha, and Carlos Zegarra. We sat down with them last week to dive into the topics of climate change, COVID-19, and racism, and we enjoyed together their insights on these challenging topics. I want to tell you that after the panel concludes, we will transition into a live question and answer time with our panelists. We invite you to submit your questions during the panel through the Ask a question icon on your screen. When you click that button, you will see other questions other people have submitted, and you can click on those if you'd like to hear and answer one of those questions. The most popular questions then will come to the front, and we'll be able to ask those of our panelists. So let's kick off our discussion by meeting Yoca. Yoca is an international sustainability professional with over 15 years of experience and the executive director of the CLIO Institute, a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to climate crisis education and advocacy with communities across Florida.
I was born in Puerto Rico, but grew up in Dominican Republic and have lived abroad in several continents. I recently moved back to Miami, Florida, where I currently live and work after being abroad for over 11 years, living in South America and in the Middle East. Living in and having grown up in the Caribbean and in Florida really got me to love our natural world. And actually, my father was great at getting getting me outdoors and getting me to the ocean and taking me fishing and camping. So since I was very little, I really learned to love our environment and to love our planet. And so, fun fact, when I was little, I always dreamed to becoming a dolphin trainer. And so, fast forward 40 something years, I am now leading the Clio Institute in Florida, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that focuses on building climate literacy, advocacy, and engagement. And really what got me into this line of work has to do with my own personal experience living in Miami. We were going through probably the most active hurricane season in our history. The one that brought us Katrina and brought us so many other big hurricanes that brought so much suffering and caused so much damage in the state and in the state of Florida and also in the South. And I just had my second son. And we had just bought a new house, and we were all bunkered in a small room as Hurricane Rita was passing by, and we could hear the tiles of the room starting to pop out. And I remember back then, I was not into sustainability or climate change advocacy. I consider myself an environmentalist for sure, but I was not working actively in that space. But I remember back then being so scared and knowing that I had gotten all the hurricane supplies that I needed to do, and we had, cover our windows. At that moment, I realized I cannot do anything more. And it was after that season that I started connecting the dots that human activity and our way of living was, really changing the composition of the atmosphere and making our planet warm. And so then right there, I decided to do something about it, because if I was part of that problem, I needed to become part of the solution. And so there I started my journey close to 15 years ago. And it wasn't until I saw a documentary that I had my aha moment and understood that the amount of greenhouse gases that we were releasing into the atmosphere was creating this crisis. And so, to me, my motivation is to try to make the world a better place for my children, for all our children. And to protect this planet that I adore, that it's so beautiful and provide us with so much. The Clio Institute's mission is to empower citizens and people to demand bold climate action. And I have admired their work for a long time. So when I came back to Florida after living abroad in so many countries, I started working as a consultant for them. And her founder, Caroline Lewis, which was a science teacher, was trying to retire and take a step back so she can focus in a lot of her educational work. And so we just created a great relationship. I fell in love with their mission and their vision and haven't stopped since. And we have a top-bottom approach to our educational programs. Not only do we work with the most underserved communities at the front lines of this crisis, but we also work with elected officials and decision makers and grass stops and faith-based communities all around the state and other educational organizations as well. So our hope is to create the public support needed to demand those policy changes that need to happen to really revert the climate crisis and to get us into a pathway of decarbonization as soon as possible, because we're running out of time.
Now let's meet our second panelist, Carlos Zegarra. Carlos is a biologist with the interdisciplinary training and more than 10 years of experience in communications, media engagement, and civic participation. Carlos is also the executive director of Sachamama. Sachamama is a Quechua word, a language spoken in the Amazon and South American Andes, and it means mother jungle. The organization is rooted in cultural heritage and builds support for a clean energy economy for all and sustainable attitudes, behaviors, and lifestyles.
A little bit about me before we start. My name is Carlos Zegarra. I am half Peruvian and half Colombian. So I was, raised by a Colombian mother and a Peruvian father. And it was very much a rich culture within my family growing up. Right now, I'm currently in Dallas, Texas. This is where I have been for the last 3 years. I'm a father of 3 beautiful, 2 boys and a little girl, my princess. And actually, that's one of the reasons why I do part of the work that I do, because I want to make sure that I also give them an opportunity to enjoy and experience this beautiful planet that we call home. So one of the things that I like to do when I am not, I'm really into this work, very passionate about it. So if I'm not reading about a book related about, sustainable development, or something about that nature, you will find me on the track. So one of the things that I love to do, especially in the morning, is first thing is after I meditate, I'll put my running shoes on and I take off and I go running. It just kind of helps me center and kind of gets me the boost of energy that I need to take the day by storm, I guess. So I am part of an organization called Sachamama. And Sachamama is a Quechua word spoken in the Andes and in the Amazon rainforest, and it means mother jungle. And in Sachamama, the organization is based in Miami, Florida, but we work across the nation, and also we're beginning to branch internationally as well. And what we do in the organization is specifically focusing on informing and activating Latinx communities around climate issues and other environmental issues that impact them. So the way that we do this in the organization, is through two fronts. Basically, the first one is communications, which basically it is attached to an initiative that we call Latinos por la Tierra, where we partner up with influencers, with media outlets, to make sure that we increase media coverage on climate issues and make sure that we are able to, our community is able to access this information as effectively as possible. And the other one is the engagement arm that we have, and basically it is attached to another initiative that we call the Climate Innovation Lab. And basically what that does is through this community-led curriculum that we have created, we prototype and we fund community-led projects within the frame of climate solutions. So the idea is that on one end, we're making sure that we're informing and connecting broader audiences to this issue, and as they get connected through those messages and through that initiative, we kind of try to funnel them into this Climate Innovation Lab program that we have, that not only will provide them with multiple tools to become more effective climate leaders, but also will provide them with the opportunity to see and implement solutions that are important to them and their communities. So the way that we have the reason why we have this model is because we noticed that one of the main challenges that we have now is the lack of communications in the environmental movement, the lack of effective communications. And that is one of the reasons why I end up being one of the co-founders of Sachamama, making sure that we're able to connect not only the stories of diverse communities, but also the needs, the realities, and the concerns of those communities into this. So it is out of that space that this organization was created, and it is out of that space that we kind of push forward these 2 initiatives that we have.
Well, it's wonderful to hear from Carlos and Yoca. And our third panelist is someone I'm actually delighted that I get to introduce. We're still working out the tech difficulties with Veronica, but we hope to get her back soon. I get to introduce to you a longtime friend, my own mentor, and the chair of the Faith and Place Action Fund Board, and that's Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III. Reverend Moss is the senior pastor of Trinity United Church of Christ on Chicago's South Side. Dr. Moss has spent the last 2 decades practicing and preaching a Black theology that unapologetically calls attention to the shared root causes of mass incarceration, environmental justice, and economic inequality.
Anyway, thank you, first of all, for having me. It's just a delight to be connected to this conversation with these wonderful folks. And I'm a big fan of the work that you all do. I'm Otis Moss, and I serve at Trinity United Church of Christ on the south side of Chicago. I'm a Chicago transplant. I didn't grow up here in Chicago, but in Cleveland, Ohio. And as a result of my connection with my family, my mother and my father are from Georgia. My wife, Monica, is from Virginia and Florida. She claims more Virginia than she does Florida. And that's a whole nother story. But both of them, my entire family was deeply connected to the land, recognized the environment as something that we're to care for, and they passed on that ethic to me. My father, interestingly enough, we joke and call him an airitarian, meaning he eats air and nothing else. But he has been a vegetarian probably since I was in high school, and made the shift when he spoke with a doctor who is also connected to the South, talking about how God had provided everything that we need to heal. And it's better to be healed with a fork than having a doctor utilize a knife. My wife, Monica, who is from Virginia, also is deeply connected to the land with her family from Druryville and Emporia, Virginia, and that they were farmers, and much of the food that they ate was raised on the land that they lived. And so the connection between these two wonderful communities, Virginia and Georgia, helped birth this idea of environmental consciousness in my spirit, which we've passed on to our children, Elijah and Michaela, who have developed this environmental consciousness too. And as a family, just on the side, we're a family that loves some basketball, especially now that the playoffs are going on. So if I dip out very quickly to check the scores, please excuse me. And then also that we also enjoy Comic-Con and comic conventions. We've been doing that for quite some time as a family. Even though they've gotten older, we still enjoy it and experiencing all of the unique nerddom around the comic conventions and the unique imagination of people who come out to those in events, who, interestingly enough, many of them are strong advocates of environmental consciousness, sustainability, and are writing in their comic books this ethic, which is a beautiful thing to see develop in a new generation.
The unique nerddom of Comic-Con. Thank you, Pastor Moss. Now that we've met all three of our panelists, let's dive in and explore the ways climate change, COVID-19, and racial injustice are all interconnected, and what we can do to address these issues. Let's start with Pastor Moss. Pastor Moss, how do you see the causes of climate change and racial injustice being intertwined?
Oh, Veronica, thank you for asking that question. I think it's really important that we begin to unwrap the connection between this. One, I'm going to talk about globally first. One is that climate change is the collective global genocide of many people of color. Whether you're talking in the islands, the Caribbean, low-lying areas, you're talking about massive starvation as climates change, and those who are privileged will not experience the impact in the same way initially. So on the global scale, we need to see that climate change will affect people of color first. When we come to the US, we understand that climate change is intertwined with racial justice and our proclivity to marginalize people of color. One, because areas where there's a concentration of people of African descent, you're talking about high rates of asthma and cancer, especially in areas in Louisiana, Cancer Alley, where you have companies that are dumping their chemicals into the land. When you're talking about the development of communities, how do we create sustainable communities? For example, when we create housing projects and place certain people in those projects, the temperature is always higher in those projects. When you have trees, native trees in a community, that there's a direct effect in terms of one's mental health around nature. There is a direct effect in terms of one's physical health around nature. There is a deep connection to this. And COVID-19, the biological disease and pandemic we're dealing with, has really helped us see with more clarity COVID-19, the spiritual disease that is affecting so many people of color. And until we can merge these two movements together, the environmental movement will always be marginalized as people just trying to save the whales and not necessarily trying to save all of humanity and all of creation.
Ooh, thank you, Reverend Moss. Now we will turn it over to Yoca. Yoca, can you share with us how you see the impacts of climate change, COVID-19, and racial injustice being intertwined?
Question, and it's actually a very interesting one. There are so many parallels that we see with the current pandemic and the climate crisis, and obviously so many years of systemic racism that are important to bring those to light. We have seen tremendous amount of COVID-19 related death in areas and communities where they have been disproportionately affected by years of environmental injustices, where higher rates of pollutions in communities of color and communities that are really vulnerable to the climate crisis are experiencing higher COVID-19 death. And I'm going to use an example here in Florida, actually in Miami-Dade County where I live, where we have seen the communities that are on the front line of the climate crisis, the communities that are really experiencing the economic burden, the environmental impacts in a very disproportionate way, being also affected by COVID-19. There's an area here in Miami-Dade which sits at a much higher ground than the rest of the county. The county here is very flat, very close to sea level, but the areas where a lot of the Black African American and a lot of the Caribbean settlements that happened early in the century are at a much higher elevation, sometimes 20 feet higher than the rest of the county. And these properties where they have settled have become something very wanted by real estate developers, because we are starting to see chronic flooding and sea level rise being a threat to a lot of our real estate, particularly in our coastal areas. So we have a phenomenon here called climate gentrification, which actually was coined here in Miami-Dade, where we're seeing areas of many of these frontline communities being disproportionately attacked by real estate developers because of the higher elevation where they at. And these are the same communities that are feeling the brunt of the climate crisis. These are the ones that don't have the necessary means to prepare for, extreme weather events like extreme heat. They're sometimes debating whether to pay for food on the table or turning on their air conditioning. And we're having, 100-degree weather days here in Miami. These are the ones that have lost their jobs because they have been either service center oriented jobs because of the pandemic, and our tourism-based economy really employs most of these people. So again, we're seeing that the disparities are really intertwined with the pandemic, which is a respiratory virus linked to the climate crisis, air pollution, and so many other impacts that are really affecting the communities that are the ones that have caused the least of it, but are definitely feeling the brunt of it.
Thank you, Yoca. And as a reminder to all of our listeners, you can ask a question as we go along. We're heading towards our live question and answer experience. So be sure, as questions come up, to put that into the Ask a Question icon, and we'll get to those later. Carlos, we're going to turn to you with your experience working with Latin American communities. Please share with us ways racial injustice in Latin America has shaped who is suffering most and migrating due to the impacts of climate change.
Yes, definitely. I think racial injustices in Latin America are not much different than in the US, meaning that most of the communities that are impacted by this are the communities that do not have the resources or the resilience to bounce back from some of these issues that they're facing. when we look into America Latina, specifically in Latin America, I meant, it's important to kind of see three pillars that the region has, and the reason why this region is heavily impacted by climate change. Because these pillars, communities that are connected to these pillars are going to be most likely disproportionately impacted by climate change. So the first one is high biodiversity hotspots. And what that means is that we have areas like the Amazon rainforest or the forest in Central America that has high concentrations of fauna and flora. In this specific pillar, we have entire local communities that depend on tourism. So what we're seeing is that climate change is because of increasing temperatures and extreme events, these areas are becoming smaller and smaller, and these species are becoming heavily affected by this. This is affecting the industry as a whole, and then the communities that depend on this industry are going to be affected as well. The second pillar is related to the infrastructure, and that is that in the region, we don't have quite the right infrastructure to sustain extreme events. So an example will be Puerto Rico in 2017 with Hurricane Maria. That was a Cat 5 hurricane that completely devastated the island. There was no electricity, there was no emergency services, there was no drinking water, there was no food. As a result of this, hundreds of thousands of families end up migrating because they didn't have the resources to rebuild, leaving their families, their culture, their history behind, and coming into the States to kind of start a new journey. And then the last one is related to that we are highly dependable in natural resources. So basically, we could talk about specifically Central America, Nicaragua, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, which are regions that are that have large concentrations of farm workers that are working the land, that their livelihoods depend on that in those lands. And what we're seeing due to the extreme, increase in temperatures, we're seeing that these droughts are devastating the region. For 5 years in a row, we're seeing, ever record heights in terms of droughts. And what is calling it, the name of that region now is the dry corridor. And what is happening is that these families are not able to sustain these individuals or their families anymore. They end up migrating to look for a better future. So if we really want to tackle these issues, whether it's here or there, we need to think about two things. We need to think about, incorporating these individuals into the decision-making process. That will give us a better understanding of the challenges that they're facing and a better understanding of the problem as a whole. And then secondly, we need to ensure that we create targeted programs to address the inequalities that these communities are facing. Only then we will be able to effectively start targeting this as a problem that is currently facing our communities in Latin America.
Hi, I'm Veronica Kyle, the Statewide Outreach Director for Faith in Place, and I'll be taking over from here from Reverend Brian Salter. So glad to be here. Thank you, Carlos. And Reverend Moss, we're going back to you. I'd love for you to share what you have learned from your experience working with green teams and faith communities on these issues of climate change and racial justice. And how would you have them think about applying and putting that into action?
Well, thank you again for asking that question. I think this is really a critical dialogue that we have to have. For communities of faith, first of all, start with Genesis. Begin at the beginning, that we are called to be stewards. We're not called to be owners, that we have to have what is called creation care consciousness. And so that begins in Genesis, that God speaks and says that you are to care for, that you are not to own, you're not to exploit. But it continues on. Exodus is one of the primary texts that deal with this idea of environmental consciousness. The people leave Egypt, not just because of oppression, but the fact that Pharaoh was operating out of a market mentality. He felt that he owned everything. And then what did God do? God begins to send environmental plagues because Pharaoh does not know how to take care of the environment. So the Jewish people, the Hebrew people leave simply so that they can care for the land and worship God. And then you go into the New Testament, and here you have a rural preacher by the name of Jesus, who uses all these rural conversations, talking about seeds falling upon the ground, and all these wonderful things that are very much connected to the land. And in the prophetic books, you talk about Amos, who was a dresser of sycamore trees. He cared for the trees and was called to be a prophet. So theological framework, number one. The other piece is that every church has a responsibility of rebuilding the community holistically. And it cannot just be on the fact that we're going to build a building and we're going to help some people. But you have to raise the question of impact, not just in the building, but how do we create a healthy community? And one of the things that we've done at Trinity is that we purchased 27 acres. We created Amani Village, which we are in the process of building, a cradle to the grave community that is designed sustainably, that will have the largest urban farm in the city of Chicago. We have a health center connected with Advocate Healthcare. So it'll be housing that will also be sustainable, a healing garden in connection with the Nature Conservancy. And then eventually we'll have a food hub where we will be bringing farmers in, not only to sell their produce, but also teaching people how food can be utilized as medicine and also as a means of economic empowerment. So Amani Village is just one way. The Faith and Place Action Fund, I would invite and encourage people to join and invite them to join the Action Fund, because many times we don't look at how policies affect. For example, when we start talking about jobs, when we're talking about economic impact, one of the best ways is green jobs, that we can make an impact in mass incarceration if we have green jobs where we also place people who are coming out of the mass incarceration system, those who are in foster care, where they are trained first and they can be at the front of the line. We can change the economic structure of communities that have not been invested in the last 30 years solely by focusing on this area of green. I'm sorry to tell you, coal is not going to save people. Oil will not. It's kind of strange that we're in the 21st century and we're looking at a 19th century technology that people are fighting to hold on to. We need to begin to utilize technology and means that will not necessarily run out or ruin the planet. And then, of course, our green teams in connection with Faith in Place, that we've deployed people in and around our community to make our community environmentally sustainable. And if I may share one little story, the first grant that we got from Faith in Place years ago when we started our community garden, we had a master gardener out there who also is an actress too. And we had a variety of young people who were working in the garden with her. They didn't want to work, but some of the guys had a crush on her, so they decided they were going to work. And the other interesting thing about that story is that they didn't want to work, but they found out that the garden was helping them to learn biology. They returned to school in the fall, and they're doing better in school because they had a George Washington Carver mentality, that literally that the soil is teaching me about algebra. You know, how these greens grow is helping me with trigonometry, because I'm now making the connection holistically. When we begin to do these things and you begin to share with your community that green isn't new, your grandmother was green. That's why she created quilts, because quilts is nothing but recycling. That's why she went in the backyard into the garden and she could make some tea that could all of a sudden solve your cramps and your headache. That our grandmothers were green. And we like to use the tagline at Trinity that we're by any greens necessary when we do work in the community.
Thank you, Reverend Moss. We can't do this work without our congregational green team. So I appreciate you giving this example. And I do remember that story of the young people working with your master gardener. And Carlos, your expertise in communication, how would you address our green teams and houses of worship to use communication effectively around these issues of health, the environment, and the racial crisis that we're dealing with today?
Yes, regardless of the issue that we want to communicate, it is important to always think about effective communications in two ways. The first one is the message that you want to convey, and the second one is the audience that you are talking to, or the frame that you want to use to get to those audiences. So about the message, we talk about seeing it as a storytelling component, because it kind of takes away the pressure of you having to kind of put a message or a communication together to reach out to a specific community, and really understand that, you know, storytelling is in our nature. That is something that we do, that we have done from the beginning of time, and that we will continue to do. Second reason why we use storytelling is because stories are undeniable. You know, you could encounter individuals that say that those facts are not true, but they will never say that your story is not true. So by you highlighting your story, you're really highlighting your values, your beliefs, your lived experiences that are very much unique to you. And therefore, no one can bring that perspective and that type of message into the movement that you're going into it. And that's why it's so important that we all share our stories, because the more diverse the stories within the movement, the stronger the movement it gets. The more people could reflect to the different stories that are kind of living within that container that we call movement. And then lastly, because storytelling brings people together. We know it, we have seen it. We're pack animals. We're searching for belonging all the time. So we always tend to get together with individuals that align with our values, with beliefs, and what we care about. So that is an opportunity to bring people together and to, at a deeper level, begin to mobilize them. Then also, that is why we see it within the frame of storytelling. But then also, it's important to add that doesn't mean that you need to pull facts aside, because effective communications or effective stories is like a really nice balance between the heart and the mind, right? It's what we call the art of storytelling, where we have emotionally compelling stories, and then we also have well-structured stories. So when you think about this, make sure that you don't leave people in the middle of your kind of hanging. People need to receive all the information for them to understand what the issue is, why is it impacting them, and why you need them in order to kind of help solve whatever challenge you're facing. So make sure it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Yeah. So that is in terms of messaging. In terms of audiences or framing, it is how we understand the communities that we're going to be talking to. And that is super important, because we want to make sure the more that we understand the community that we're talking to, the more effective our story is going to be. And it's going to change. It's not like we have a story that is going to be the same forever. You know, depending on the community that we're talking to, is going to change a little bit. So when we're looking at communities, it is important to see, you know, what is the environment of that community, right? You know, what are they dealing with right now? You know, are they living in polluted neighborhoods? Are they dealing with environmental injustices? So the more that we know, the better. So what are the expectations, right? What do they expect to get? You know, it is important to understand what do they want to get out of this interaction, because in order for us to raise those expectations, we need to first fulfill the ones that are currently on the table. So the more pieces that we have, the more effective we will be into engaging and connecting to those diverse communities. So always think about in terms of messaging and in terms of audiences.
Thanks, Carlos, for your insights. And people, don't forget to use the link of Ask a Question on your screen. This is the opportunity to put your questions in And if you see one that's already there, just click on that so it could go to the top and we'll see that other people are interested in getting that same answer. And now we're going to save the last question for Yoca. What is your experience working with youth? How are they addressing these issues, these challenges that they're faced with, quite frankly, that they have inherited around these issues, around race, COVID-19, and the climate crisis? Can you share that with us, Yoca?
This is a question that I love because the Clio Institute works with many youth leaders across the state. We have our youth movement called Gen Clio, and we have been giving them, trainings and resources and helping them find their voice to better advocate for climate solutions. I think the youth movement have given this crisis a new impetus, and sparked by, certainly not only by Greta Thunberg, but sparked by so many great leaders around the world, like Chutexka Martinez from Earth Guardian, Isra, here in Florida, we have Delaney Reynolds. There's so many, youth advocates and activists around our country that have been calling for, for a more just and equitable, world. But I think that, youth have such a pivotal and critical place in this fight. We are seeing youth demanding swift, bold action from elected officials. Here in Miami, Florida, a group of youth leaders march and rally in front of City Hall until the mayor declare a climate emergency. And right after that, they have been able to obtain more than 6 climate emergency declarations in different municipalities. We actually have a youth-led podcast called House on Fire, led by 2 incredible youth leaders from their Latino activists that focus most of the show on climate justice, led by John Paul Mejia and also by Gabriela Rodriguez. So I highly recommend it in any of the podcast platforms that you may have. It's called House on Fire. But I think, again, the youth voice is critical, is super important. We adults have been failing them, but when we put youth in front of elected officials and decision makers, it's just, it's the kind of energy, the kind of passion, and the kind of, humanity and that we need for politicians to listen. And so I think they're just so important, and I think they're going to get the things done that we haven't been able to do.
Yes, youth. Thank you for that. Youth have truly put their voices out here in this movement today. We see this with the Black Lives Matter movement. We see it with climate change, social justice. I'm very, very proud of that. Thank you, Yoca, for sharing what you did. So now we're going to be transitioning to the live Q&A. I see many of you are starting to put in questions, and we welcome you to continue to do that in the chat room. I am hoping that we will get lots of questions for our esteemed panelists this afternoon. I want to thank Reverend Moss. I want to thank Yoca and Carlos for joining us for this inspiring keynote panel. We will now transition, as I said, to the Q&A live. But while I have all the panel in the room, I'm going to add some questions. We talk about this just recovery, a just recovery. And I just like to start with you, Reverend Moss. When you hear a just recovery, what comes to mind? We're recovering from what justly?
Well, when I hear just recovery, I always get nervous because I want to make sure they're not talking about just us, just one community.
Yes.
I want it to be just
all of us.
I want it to be all of us. I truly want it to be all of us. So when I hear just recover, I think through in terms of holistic health, social determinants of what a healthy community is, not just a healthy body, but what does a healthy community look like? in terms of home ownership, in terms of schools, in terms of the land being fertile and able to breathe. So when I hear the word, hear the words when we say that I can't breathe, I hear the planet saying I can't breathe. And if the planet can't breathe, we can't breathe. But the first people who have asphyxiation are people of color. And that's what we need to deal with when we start talking about just recovery. Who are the people who are being choked by destructive policies? How do we ensure that the disinherited, the disenfranchised, the disempowered are able to breathe? And how do we ensure that our planet is able to thrive in the process?
Thank you. And Carlos, I'd like to ask you, what is it that you think about when you're starting to have your programs and you look for collaboration? If you were to tell people, how do you collaborate with others in your community to be able to address these issues?
Yes, that's, and thank you for having me. And that is such an important question, because really, the only way that we really are going to move forward is through collaborations. This is not really about one community alone, but it's all of us as a group. So understanding what is important to each community, to us, is the foundation to engage with those communities. One of the things that we have seen in the past is that we try to, with best intentions, go into a community and try to help address some of the challenges that they have. But if we don't take the time to really understand, what are those structures, what are those mental models that are keeping those communities in need, we're going to be continuing, perpetrating that challenge, that problem. So it is really important for us to come always with this idea that we don't have all the answers, that we need them, any community, as much as they need us in order to move forward. And I think if we're able to come with that mindset into all of the conversations, we will be a lot better in terms of outcomes and what is it, and engagement from all the groups and stakeholders in the space.
Thanks, Carlos. And Yoca, I have a question for you. How do you address communities who feel overwhelmed by the issues, like, say, flooding? What can we do? Where can we start? This is such a big, natural issue. Who am I in the community? What can I do? And you work with communities around, climate crisis education. So how would you advise a community who was feeling overwhelmed by an environmental issue?
That's a great question, Veronica. Well, I think it goes back to what Carlos was just saying, listening to them. And normally when we come into a community, we start with listening to each other. What is really at the root of the problems of the community? Do they have a seat in the table? Are they being listened? Are they engaging with their local and county officials? And I think, with regards to some of the programs that we have in place here in Florida, that seems to have, the best response. We bring the community to try to get to know each other first, and then we start trying to connect them with other entities that are working at the local level. And we do so also in collaboration, because as Carlos said, we cannot do it otherwise. So, for example, we have a program called Empowering Resilient Women that is, focused on building resilience through women. They're the first responders, after a natural disaster. They're the ones taking care of the elderly, the children, feeding our communities. So we're focusing on building resilience through women. And so we partner with other organizations that are focused on women empowerment. We work with the YWCA, with the Women's Fund. And so we try to bring in partners that are trying to elevate women's voices and try to empower women with many other resources, right? And so I think it's important to try to get them, elevate their voices, amplify those voices, and also a seat at the table. And so we fill that gap being connectors between the community and the decision makers. And I think that's one of the ways that I think really works best for us.
Thanks, Yoca. And there was someone who had a question for you, Reverend Moss. The question was, how would you combine the issue and talk about environmental justice and abolition in Illinois? How do the two intersect, and what could we do to bring a more equitable Illinois if we address those both?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm glad someone asked that question. I think one of the best examples to be able to talk about that would be the Cook County Jail. The Cook County Jail, which is experiencing a ravaging of human beings and their bodies as a result of COVID-19. We could talk about prisons in reference to COVID-19. And so locking people up, the funding that we shift to prisons, our inability to be able to create public health strategies. Public health is connected also to land health, because we know that if you want to have a healthy community, you need something called trees and grass and so things of that nature. So we really could build policy if we begin to talk public health and not criminalization that begins to defund, because the Cook County Jail should not be the largest mental health facility that doesn't do mental health. But the majority of people who are at the Cook County Jail waiting on a trial are people who have some form of medication. And the only reason that they're there, because you're innocent until you're proven guilty, is because they don't have the money to, or the lawyer, in order to wait for their trial. So it's a cruel system to incarcerate. And then as a result of being incarcerated, you then are under the threat of COVID-19. And then as a result of being incarcerated, you then are unhealthy. You then go home and infect more people. And so we see the ravages of a disease that we have not appropriately handled because we don't have a public, holistic health strategy that recognizes that environment and human bodies are linked in a symbiotic relationship.
Great answer. And I have a question, and I hope I can get an answer from all of you. One of our viewers asked, with all of these issues intertwined, communities that are at the highest risk, whether it's racial injustice, COVID-19 and climate change, where do they start? Where do they go? Where do they start? So, Carlos, I'm going to come back to you.
Yes. Well, that's a question that we hear a lot, and I think the easiest and faster answer is you start with you. Ultimately, we believe that in order for us to see the changes that we want to see in the systems and out there, we need to start within ourselves. That will not only make us more congruent in the message that we're putting out there, but it will give us also the foundation to speak on something that we are also going through or trying to change within ourselves. So that will be the first thing that I will acknowledge. And the second one will be to really take into account your story. Really think about it in a sense that a lot of times we think, oh, but we don't know much about these issues, and we don't want to look like we don't know much about it. When in reality, we are all experts on this. And the reason why we're experts is because we all have our own experiences. We all have our own belief systems, our own values, and that makes us experts on our own right. We bring to the space something that no one else can bring but us. And this is what we need. We need diversity in the voices. The more diverse those voices are, the stronger the movement, like I said, is going to be. So just acknowledging that. And then lastly, I will say that acknowledge the leadership that we all have natively. We are all as well leaders in our own right. We lead through, every day we take leadership positions, whether we're a mom, leading our family around, whether we are a kid leading the team or their friends, however you want to see it. We also need to come into peace with that idea of leadership and say, we are our leaders. We have all those tools. We have everything that we need to make sure that we are able to mobilize different individuals within our own circles. So those three will be the ones. First, make the change within. Change starts within. Acknowledge your own story, and second, know that you're a leader on your own.
Love it. Yoca, what about you?
Well, we at the Clio Institute, when we do speaker certification, we always tell all our attendees and our participants that we have superpowers, and that we should all be using at least the most important superpowers, which are the power of our voices, the power of our choices, and then the power of our votes. And so I think, communities need to start getting a lot more civically engaged. We need to be able to communicate our needs. A lot of these communities and marginalized communities have been unserved for decades, and it's time to elevate their voices, and it's time to be asking and demand that elected officials for the things that they need. We're seeing obviously a lot of disparities in our health system, and that is something that in a first world country cannot happen. And right now, I heard somebody say yesterday, really resonated to me, that we tout ourselves as a first world country, but we're really creating second-class citizens to deal with third world issues. And so I think it is important to understand that, there are a lot of us, a lot of people out there that need their voices to be elevated, and we all need to be a lot more civically engaged. And so that's where we need to start.
Thanks, Yoca. Reverend Moss, you.
I think all those pieces just completely hit the nail on the head, without a doubt. The only thing that I would add is that we make sure that we have a moral compass, that moral compass is directing us. So that's our consciousness. But then we also have to have moral action, and the action from the consciousness that we have. But from the action, it's even not enough just to do the action. We just have to have a moral imagination, meaning that we have to be able to see, think, believe, and dream of a world that is not yet, but we act as if it's already operating now. So everyone is a leader and everyone is an influencer. We love that term now, influencer, that you can influence someone. You don't have to have a position. You just have to know that your influence can change positions and shift power, whether it's in your church, your civic organization. You have to take a position. You have to use your influence. You have to join an organization. Just don't sit back and read about it and become someone who has a lot of knowledge. We got to have some moral action. We need people with a moral imagination. And if you recognize and see that yourself as an influencer, I guarantee you will create a new tribe of individuals who will have an environmental consciousness that will have moral imagination.
Thank you. Speaking of just getting knowledge, one of the questions that's come up is, what are you individually reading right now? What are you reading? This is juicy. I'm going to start with you, Carlos. What are you reading?
Well, this morning, I just finished a book by Tim Ferriss called The 4-Hour Week.
Before what?
The 4-Hour Work Week. That's what it's called.
4-hour
work week.
4-hour work week. Oh, I have that book. It's pretty awesome. Yes.
It is. It really breaks, thinking about, one of the reasons why I like it so much is because it really helps us reframe a lot of the beliefs that we think need to be, or that we need to be following in this day and age. And this is actually what is missing, like what we're missing right now. We need to help ourselves reframe some of the things that we have been taught, or kind of unlearn some of the things in order to kind of relearn them the right way. So these books really kind of open your mind in a way that you're like, I have thought this all my life, and now I see that it just doesn't apply. We just need to be able to try new things and venture in new ways, and that's very much what we need right now in the environmental movement as well. Being able to explore new pathways, being able to engage in a different way with one another as well as with nature. So that was my book.
Got you. And real quick, Yoca, your book, and then Reverend Moss, and then I got some other questions that I want to get out here before our time is up. Just, what are you reading,
Sounds
Yoca?
good. So I have two books. One that I started and I keep next to my night table. I think I'm trying to see if I could get it through osmosis or something, because it's about this big, and it's by Jared Diamond, called Upheaval. And then another one from a Miami local author called Disposable City. And it really talks about the issues that we're facing here in Miami with sea level rise and chronic flooding. So I highly recommend it. It's a really good one.
Thank you. Pastor Moss.
You should not have asked me this.
You're reading about 100 books?
Got a list. No, I'm not going to show them. I got to like sitting right next to me. One, speaking of influencers, my mother sent me this book, Cast by Isabella Wilkerson.
Love her.
Starting to read that. The other piece that I read all the time, Howard Thurman. Anything by him is worth reading. I'm also a big fan. I've been reading the reports from the Lincoln Land Institute. It's about land and about how to rejuvenate cities. And I'm a big fan of the Oxford American, if you like Southern literature, but it also gives us great social justice perspective. And a gentleman by the name of Charles Johnson writes these short stories, Dr. King's Refrigerator. It's actually pretty good, that are kind of philosophical stories. So that's what I'm reading right now.
Wow. Here's a question. Someone just put in a chat box that population is hardly ever talked about when we talk about climate change and global warming. And what role do you feel population has on these issues? And how important would population control be in terms of creating policy issues? Woo. I'm going to leave that. I'm start with you, Yoca.
I think it's a great question, and whoever asks is absolutely true. We don't talk about this enough, and we really have to discuss that we live in a planet that has finite resources. And right now, if we go by the kind of consumption that we have alone in this country, we will be needing about 4.5 planets, which we don't have. So we are a very wasteful society, and we're using a lot more than our planet can replenish itself. We are actually living in basically overdraft. And so we really need to look at what the earth is able to provide us and what we need to sustain, ourselves. But we need to forget about greed if we really want to be able to sustain life as we know it, for the next generations to come. We're going to be 10 billion people pretty soon. And right now, we are in the midst of a climate emergency. And so we need to rethink not only about our consumption habits and our very wasteful practices, but we're going to have to rethink also of how we're going to, find ways to live with what nature is providing us, whether it's curbing, population, that remains to be seen. But the earth does provide enough of what we need. But the problem is we're wasting a lot more. Just alone in this country, we waste 40% of the food we grow. So imagine with all the hunger there is in the world, we are already wasting 40% of what we're producing. I mean, there's no way we can sustain ourselves in the future with 10 billion people. We need to rethink about how we grow our food, how we consume our food, and how we, stop wasting food. So it's a very complex question, but it's definitely something that we all need to be talking about a lot more.
Well, this is great because this leads to another question I have, and we only have a few more minutes for this, so I'm going to need you to have your answers short, but this is important. Someone mentioned in the chat box, several people, that sustainability and environmental justice and equity tend to be perceived to really happen to be very expensive, costly. So how do we begin to shift that perception, with policymakers, people on the ground who often look at this, like, to be able to do this, we can't afford it. So I'm going to start with you, Reverend Moss, and Carlos, if we have time, I'd like for you to just kind of add to, answer to that question as well.
It's funny to me that we create these new terms and then all of a sudden they become very academic, because sustainability has always been something that has always come from the ground up. Anybody who's had any gumbo, that's a sustainable meal. It's a meal that somebody is utilizing from the things that have been left over in order to feed a family. If anybody's ever been warmed by a quilt, that's sustainability. And then all of a sudden we use these terms that become incredibly complicated, and then we export them and exploit them and then find ways to market them. And then it ends up in Whole Foods, instead of seeing that this is something that communities do all the time. And we've got to begin to break down the language and go back to the simplicity that sustainability comes from the roots, not from the top. It comes from the grassroots, not from the ivory tower down. And once we see that, we can then see that our grandmothers were green and they knew sustainability before they had a term for sustainability. They would just say, go in the backyard and pick me out something so we can eat tonight.
Love it. Thank you. I'm going to try to squeeze in one more. I don't think I can, but one of them is, what type of economy, Carlos, do you see, or market system that would specifically address environmental justice and health justice?
Well, that is a really good question. I think in order for us to create the economy that we want, that is just and for not only few but everyone, we really need to reevaluate our own the way that we not only our relationship with our planet, but also the relationship with the natural systems that we have. Because the challenge that we have right now is that the economy see the planet as a depletable resource. So we need to start changing that idea and say, it's not, it's only worth something if it's out of it. Like if you cut wood, it's worth something. If you catch fish, it's worth something. When in reality, the planet is what we call the ecosystem services that it provides are a lot more, they provide a lot more when they're in their natural environment than when they're out of their natural environment. So thinking about the planet as a value system, planet is what we really need in order to understand that we don't really need to change much, but we really need to change the perception on how we see our planet. And if we're able to kind of make that switch, I think we will be in a lot better place than we are right now.
Thank you. I want to stop. I hate this is so good. I want to have to stop it right now, but I want to thank you, Yoca, Reverend Moss, and Carlos for joining us. You have been so inspiring, so many insights. And for all the other questions that are out there, we have our question gatherers gathering them all. We're going to do everything we can to be able to get these answered and reach out to. They're all amazing. I should send them all to you too. You'll probably write your next sermon with Reverend Moss. Inspired. We're about to transition in about 1 minute. You got a stretch break, and then we're going to be bringing on the award recipients for our Just Recovery Green Team Award. So you got 1 minute, probably a little less than that now, about 40 seconds to stretch, and then we'll be bringing them on. Thank you all again. This was amazing.
Celeste Flores, and I'm the Lake County Outreach Director, and I'm so delighted to be here with everyone and talk a little bit about these awards that we're giving out tonight. They're called the Just Recovery Awards, and across the state, we saw how our green teams really pivoted in the month of March because of COVID-19, and saw how we connected environmental justice, poverty, and all these injustices with the response to COVID and how our communities were dealing with that. So because of that, we are actually going to be giving out 2 awards tonight for green teams, for houses of worship that we feel really went above and beyond when it came to connecting with the community and responding to it. So I have the honor and the privilege of giving this award to Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe. And they already had a food pantry set in place before COVID-19 hit Waukegan, Illinois, but they knew that they needed to do much more in addressing the needs of their environmental justice community. They expanded their food pantry to serving families twice a week, and it has served over 800 families weekly since the pandemic started. They have also mobilized a congregation to provide PPE, emergency aid for rent, utility bills, and other necessities for those that were unable to seek this assistance through government agencies. Their work they do supports a just recovery from COVID, racism, and climate change.
Thank you, Celeste. I'm Cindy Shepard, and I'm the Central Illinois Director. My honor to present a Just Recovery Award today to McKinley Church and Foundation, which is located on the University of Illinois campus. When COVID hit in March, one of the most important questions to the people of this congregation was, how are we going to respond with our food pantry, which they had been supporting in a vulnerable neighborhood in Champaign. Previously, the Green Team had connected with the food pantry by putting in a huge community container garden on the church grounds and supplying fresh produce for the clients who came to the food pantry for their food. But most of the people who actually staffed the pantry were older, retired church members who were, of course, were very high risk for the virus. So they thought, we just don't know how we'll staff it. It's during the day, what are we going to do? And this dilemma was solved when they got a phone call from Jenna Fry, who's the chair of the Green Team there at McKinley. And she said, hey, listen, like many people who work in the hospitality industry now, I and many of my friends are out of a job. But we do have our food safety certificates and we love to serve food. Could we please come and help pack boxes to deliver and distribute at the pantry? And that's what happened. Because they were able to keep serving, and when the need in the neighborhood grew and grew, they were able to fill that need and able to respond. Over 300 pounds of fresh produce has come out of the Giving Garden, and countless hours of volunteer packing and distributing has enabled many people in this hard-hit area to be fed. The impact from the garden to the pantry to the people is direct and tangible. It's visible and relied upon for both the harvest and the community engagement that it provides. So everyone wins when a Green Team helps lead toward a just recovery. Please join me in giving these two wonderful Green Teams a round of virtual applause for the award winners, McKinley Presbyterian and Nuestra Señora de Guadalupe.
And Noah, slide 4 and 8.
Thank you, Reverend Shepard, Celeste. Shout out to the inspiring leadership. Round of applause for our Just Recovery Award recipients. I also want to say just a big thank you to Veronica Kyle, our statewide outreach director, and all of our panelists. Weren't they fantastic? Big virtual round of applause for all of our panelists for setting the foundation for us this week. I want to take the time, again, my name is Reverend Brian Souter, Executive Director of Faith in Place, to invite you to join at any point the rest of this week. As you can see in this slide, by accessing this same Chime site, you can attend any workshop by clicking on the agenda link and checking out the times and the amazing speakers we have in our upcoming workshops. The Zoom room links for each of these workshops will be made available at this agenda tab under each workshop. By the way, we want to hear your feedback from tonight and from any of your participation in the Green Team Summit. And you'll notice at the Chime site, there is a link to a conference survey. Please plan to fill that out this week after you've attended your last workshop to give us good, solid feedback so we can continue to improve the offerings of Faith in Place to you all, our Green Teams, and our people of faith and conscience who are leading the environmental movement. By the way, anyone who participates in that survey, you'll be put into a drawing to be eligible for fabulous environmental prizes. Some of our sponsors have donated some pretty cool prizes, so be sure to fill out that survey to be eligible for those prizes. Throughout the week, each workshop is going to follow a similar format. We will start with live DJing from Antonio Caesar. By the way, the remix you heard when you entered the room tonight was an original mix by DJ Antonio Caesar with our summer high school youth program participant, Tiara. At each workshop after the opening from DJ Caesar, we will then hear from our presenters in the workshop for 20 minutes of content to take the foundational words we heard tonight towards deeper application in each topic area. So after this initial 20-minute presentation, we will then utilize the breakout rooms to talk in small groups, get to know one another, learn from each other, and then we'll come back together, followed by 15 minutes of questions and answers. We'll also be giving out several more additional Green Team awards this week, so be sure to stay tuned for that. It's great to hear from inspirational leaders who are paving the way in our communities to connect the dots between environmentalism, mass incarceration, and a just economy. I want to highlight for you our speakers and topics, give you a sneak peek for tomorrow. Very cool that we have Dr. Natasha Desjarnette from the National Environmental Health Association. We also have Dr. Jalise Rahman, who's on the Faith and Place board and is at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and Jackie Patterson from the NAACP. These three speakers are all fantastic. If you can all make it, please do come for the lively conversation. And don't worry, if you can't make it, because you have access to the Chime site, you can log in at any time and access the recording and be able to enjoy the content, take it back to your community. Our goal here is to continue to advance the movement of people in faith and conscience, leading the environmental movement towards justice, making a measurable difference in our communities. Well, that's enough from me. For our final word tonight, I want to pass the stage over to our fantastic and inspirational board chair, and that's Karen Lewis. Karen, take us away.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Brian, for the exciting overview of this week. As Brian said, I'm Karen Lewis, and I am the board chair of Faith and Place. I want to take a moment to thank some of our sponsors who have made this event possible. This list includes the Gaylord and Dorothy Donnelly Foundation, ComEd, Wendy Paulson, the Natural Resources Defense Council, Gashiro and Tully Real Estate, Citizens Utility Board, the Mike Nowak Show, Natural Awakenings Chicago, the Illinois Environmental Council, the Center for Neighborhood Technology, and Climate Reality. And because I feel so strongly about Faith and Place's mission and the impact that this Green Team Summit has on making meaningful strides toward environmental stewardship and advocacy, my husband Bob and I are also sponsors. I also want to thank the many people who donated after registering for the Green Team Summit. Every dollar helps Faith and Place serve more faith communities in advancing environmental justice, which in turn benefits our broader community. And I wouldn't be a good board chair unless I also encourage those who have not yet contributed to consider doing so through this platform or through the Faith and Place website. Thank you very much. Most of all, I want to thank the Faith and Place team for their tireless work in making this event happen. As evidenced earlier this afternoon, this team has figured out how to pivot. If I could give them an award as well, I would. Like most organizations, our team has been working remotely all across the state, collaborating since March. Creating a brand new 5-day virtual event like this is no small task. As board chair of Faith and Place, I get to see the hard work put into partnering with 358 faith partners and 147 green teams all across Illinois to educate, connect, and advocate for healthier communities. Because this year's summit is virtual, we are actually reaching environmental advocates all across the country. And in fact, I saw a question from someone in Kenya. Welcome to Faith and Place. I encourage you to explore our website for additional resources. Faith and Place works at that critical juncture between environmental racism, public health, and climate change. No matter what your religion or how active you are in practicing it, many religious-based texts call upon us to care for our earth, both its inhabitants and the land, flora, and fauna within. In Judaism, my faith, one essential tenet is tikkun olam, which means repairing the world. May the next 4 days encourage each of us to find a way to not get back to normal, but to get to better. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow at 4:30 p.m. Central Time for our first series of workshops. And now, I turn the mic and screen over to our own DJ Caesar. Take care, and thank you.
Oh, how they care for you. Oh, how they care for you.